Prior to the 19th century, the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment had been the backbone for ideals and values. However, there was soon a transformation. The new ideas opened the way to a modern consciousness, but also created a sense of confusion and anxiety.
That's great, it starts with an earthquake, birds and snakes, an airplane, and Lenny Bruce is not afraid.
There was now a new view of the physical universe that challenged previous assumptions.
French scientists Marie Curie and her husband Pierre were at the forefront of creating a new physics. They discovered that atoms were created by subatomic particles, which completely refuted the old view on science.
Soon Max Planck discovered new photons of energy, which he called quanta. This new quantum theory raised even more questions regarding the atom. Then, in 1905, Albert Einstein published his special theory of relativity and created his epochal formula E equals mc squared.
Many were unable to comprehend these ideas until the total eclipse of the sun in May of 1919, which confirmed Einstein's theory of relativity.
The early 1900s also witnessed a change intellectually, with a new understanding of the irrational.
Friedrich Nietzsche was an intellectual who glorified the irrational and claimed that reason played little role in human life. He argued that God is dead, and this idea would liberate humans, making it possible to create the Superman, a higher kind of being.
Henry Bergson was also a popular revolutionary against reason, as well as Georges Sorel, who combined both Bergson's and Nietzsche's ideas.
Sigmund Freud believed human behavior was determined by the unconscious, which consisted of three contending forces: the id, the ego, and the superego.
The id was the center of unconscious drives and was ruled by the pleasure principle. The ego was the seat of reason and coordinator of the inner life, governed by the reality principle. And the superego was the center of conscious and moral values. Its purpose was to control unsatisfactory drives of the id.
Soon after came social Darwinism and its popular creator, Herbert Spencer. He argued that progress came from the struggle for survival, which brought about the idea that only the fittest survive. Spencer's ideas soon became applied to human society in more radical ways by rabid nationalists and racists.
The growth of scientific thinking and the forces of modernization created new challenges for the Christian church. However, Darwin's theory of evolution seemed to pose the biggest threat. This led to the religious movement of modernism, which was an attempt by the church to reinterpret Christianity.
Soon Pope Leo XIII even permitted the teaching of evolution as a hypothesis.
The revolutions in physics and psychology were also paralleled by a revolution in literature and the arts.
Much of the late 19th century literature was dominated by naturalism, a continuation of realism that lacked the underlying note of liberal optimism.
Naturalists like Emile Zola accepted the material world as real but were pessimistic about Europe's future.
Leo Tolstoy's greatest work, War and Peace, also incorporated realistic views which contributed to the golden age for Russian literature.
By the late 19th century, artists were seeking new forms of expression, which led to modernism.
Leading up to modernism, impressionists like Pissarro had rejected studios and put their impressions of the changing effects of light on objects in nature.
Pissarro's style was an inspiration to Claude Monet, who captured the interplay of light, water, and atmosphere in his Impression Sunrise.
Bertha Morisot was another Impressionist painter who became one of the few female professional painters of the time.
By the 1880s, there was a new movement known as post-impressionism. These types of artists sought to use both color and line to express inner feelings. Paul Cézanne's painting Woman with Coffee Pot and Vincent van Gogh's Starry Night were two of the most famous post-impressionist works.
Musicians began expressing their nationalistic spirits. The Impressionist movement in music incorporated primitive sounds to enhance the elusive moods and haunting sensations they wanted to create. A chief exponent of musical primitivism was Igor Stravinsky. The uncertainties in European intellectual and cultural life were paralleled by growing anxieties in European political life. By the 1830s, many women in the US and Europe were pushing for gender law reform.
Famous women enforced the feminist movement, such as Florence Nightingale, Clara Barton, and Millicent Fawcett.
Also during this time period came new women who renounced traditional feminine roles, sought new freedom outside the household, and new roles other than those of wives and mothers.
Maria Montessori was a perfect example of a new woman. She was the first Italian woman to receive a medical degree, and she created a system of learning where children learn at their own pace.
Also during this time period, Jews were granted more legal equality. The French Revolutionary Decrees of 1790 emancipated the Jewish people and admitted them to full citizenship. Many Jews who were emancipated left the ghetto and became assimilated into cities.
However, Jewish people were not always accepted into society. For example, Alfred Dreyfus, a Jewish man, was a captain in the French General Staff. In 1895, he was caught selling army secrets and condemned to life in prison on Devil's Island. However, after the trial, he was proven innocent and the government pardoned him and fully exonerated 11 years after he was first convicted.
In Vienna, Jews were also not accepted. Christian socialists and agitated workers combined to make a group of anti-Semitists. Karl Lueger, the mayor of Vienna, was a strong proponent of German nationalism. He blamed corruption on the Jews.
Germany also had strong anti-Semitic parties, but they lost their strength after 1898. At the same time, the worst treatment of Jews was happening in Eastern Europe because 72% of the entire world's Jewish population was living there.
There was forced living places, persecutions, and pogroms. These horrible conditions led to emigration.
Theodor Herzl, a key figure in political Zionism, published a book called The Jewish State, in which he advocated for Jews living in their own homeland.
Many Zionists moved to Palestine after the first Zionist conference said its aim was the creation of a new home in Palestine, secured by public law.
Great Britain also had political problems caused by new mass politics. Liberals in Great Britain were forced to adopt social reforms because of trade unions and the Labour Party.
Trade unions called for collective ownership and control over production, distribution, and exchange. Fabian socialists were intellectuals who stressed the need for the workers to use their right to vote to capture the House of Commons.
In 1900, representatives of both trade unions and Fabian socialists coalesced to form the Labour Party. 6 years later, the party elected 29 members to the House of Commons.
David Lloyd George was a brilliant Welsh orator who advanced social reforms.
The National Insurance Act of 1911 provided benefits for workers in case of sickness and unemployment. Other legislation provided pensions for retirees. To pay for these acts, Lloyd George implemented higher tax burdens on the wealthy.
In Italy, liberals had even greater problems.
Giovanni Giolitti
Served intermittently as prime minister, bringing some stability from 1903 to 1940 by using
Transformismo,
which is a system where old political groups are transformed into new government coalitions.
Emperor
Wilhelm II.
made Germany the strongest military and industrial power on the continent by 1914.
However, tensions arose in Germany because of the conflict between modernization and traditionalism. This tension caused many nationalistic groups to sprout who advocated imperialism as a tool to overcome social divisions and unite all classes.
Sergei Witt was the Minister of Finance in Russia, who guided the massive surge of industrialization.
Witt knew industrialization was key for Russia's strength, so he pushed for railroad development, protective tariffs, and rapid growth of steel and coal industries.
With this industrialization came repression of the working class and new socialist revolutionary groups. The growing opposition to the Tsarist regime exploded in the Revolution of 1905.
In the midst of the Russo-Japanese War, a massive procession of workers went to the Winter Palace in St. Petersburg to present a petition of grievances to the Tsar.
However, troops opened fire on the peaceful demonstration and killed hundreds of people in what is now known as Bloody Sunday. After Bloody Sunday, workers went on strike, formed unions, and generally rebelled.
In an attempt to maintain peace, Nicholas II issued the October Manifesto, which granted civil liberties and agreed to create a legislative assembly known as the Duma.
However, only 2 years later, Nicholas had already curtailed the Duma's power.